Hi, I'm Holly from Play and Say. Play and Say is a speech therapy center in Hammond, and we work with children. We get a lot of kids in our clinic that need help with producing speech sounds correctly. So when we start to work with these kids, a lot of times what the parents will ask me is, what do I do when my child says speech sounds incorrectly? Do I correct them or make them correct the sound, or do I ignore it? So in today's video, that's the question that we're going to try to answer for you. Again, parents usually say, do I ignore it or do I make them correct it? And actually, most of the time, I'm going to say that we're going to pick a totally different option. Those two choices aren't usually the best choice. I don't like for us to ignore speech sounds that are incorrect, because then it becomes habitual and your child might think that it's actually the correct way to say the sound, and then that can even kind of start to trickle into their ability to start to learn to read and write, because they'll start to read and write the way that they hear the sound, and it might not be correct. So it does kind of become a bigger issue. So I don't want to ignore it, okay? But it's usually also not appropriate to ask them to correct the speech sound every single time they say it incorrectly. That's something that we do in a speech therapy session, but it's done in a really therapeutic manner, and we're being very careful about how we correct speech sounds, what kind of support we give to the child. We want to give them enough support so that they're successful, but if we give them too much support in producing those speech sounds correctly, they might actually get dependent on our help and not be able to do it independently. So I don't really usually like for parents to try to correct them a lot, just because we want to make sure we're doing that correctly and in a very therapeutic way. There are a few exceptions to this. When I have a child who has worked on a set of speech sounds for a long time and they've gotten really good at it, and we know that they can produce it correctly, with just some reminders and not a lot of other support, then I usually say it's okay for parents to sometimes make them correct it, because they're capable of doing the sound correctly. It's just that they forget, because it becomes habitual for them to use the incorrect sound. So in those cases, when we've gotten to that point in therapy where the kid can make the sound, they just sometimes need a reminder. In that case, it's okay for parents to make them correct their speech some of the time. I still don't even ask parents to do it all of the time, because I don't want to embarrass the child. I don't want to embarrass them in front of other people. So I am a little bit careful about when we make those corrections. So this leaves us in a position where most of the time, when a child produces a speech sound incorrectly and we're not in an actual therapy session, we don't really want to use the option of just ignoring it, and we don't always want to make the child correct themselves. So I have a totally different strategy for you, and it's called recasting. I love this idea. It's kind of been packaged and explained by Dr. Carolyn Bowen, who is a phenomenal speech pathologist, and she's done lots and lots of work in the actual area of speech sound disorders. So she's a great evidence-based go-to person to get good information about how we can deal with some of these issues. So recasting, what that actually means is when the child produces speech and there's an error, instead of ignoring it, instead of making the child correct themselves, we just repeat back what the child said but corrected. So for example, if the child says, I want to play with the tar, and you know they mean car, then I would repeat back to the child, oh, you want to play with the car? Let me find the car for you. So what I did, instead of overtly pointing out their incorrect speech, and instead of ignoring it, I repeated it back to them but corrected. And what we have found in the research is that this is actually a really helpful strategy, and it really does help improve speech sounds. And it's just so simple for parents to use. It's very natural. It helps you continue the conversation on in a natural manner. You still have a great back and forth interaction and conversation with your child, which we know is important, and it helps nurture the language areas of the brain so that your child continues to develop speech and language appropriately. What happens when we correct our children too much is that actually interrupts a natural flowing conversation, and we lose that interaction. So then we kind of sacrifice the nurturing of the language and speech areas of the brain. So when we use recasting, it's very natural. Usually we're using the child's own language, their own utterance. We're just giving it back to them with the corrected speech sounds. And that's also great because it's the child's interest, and it's something they already know and that they like to talk about. And it's a child-initiated topic of conversation. So all of those are more reasons why it makes recasting so successful. When we try to get our kids to use say a speech sound correctly in a word or a sentence that we picked, it's not as therapeutically beneficial because it's not their language. It may not be something they care about or want to talk about. It might be a word that they don't even know. So when we can use recasting, we're taking what the child can already do and we're just giving it back to them in a better model. So a couple of rules about recasting. Number one is that it's very tempting to overemphasize the incorrect word. So if we go back to this car example, it's tempting to say, oh, you want the car? You want the car? Let me get the car. That actually, the research shows that that's not as beneficial. Doing that kind of distorts the speech sounds, and it isn't natural, and it doesn't work as well. It's actually better if you emphasize the word just slightly, but not an over exaggerated emphasis on the word. So a better way to do it would be, oh, you want the car? Let me find the car for you. That's not over exaggerated. Another thing, another rule to remember about recasting is you want to aim for as many repetitions of the target word as you can. So this is particularly important for children that have difficulty learning speech sounds. If your child has some speech sound errors, but it's developmentally appropriate and it's not too much for their age, that might not be as important to aim for lots and lots of repetitions. You can recast it once or twice, and that might be sufficient for your child. But if your child does have difficulty developing speech sounds and they have a lot of errors in their speech, you actually need to aim for more repetitions. I think the recommendation is maybe 10 to 15. I'll have to go back and look. I'll leave it in the comments for you. But you want to aim for more like 10 or 15 repetitions of that word. So if we go back to our same example, your child means car, but he says, I want the tar, then I might say back, oh, you want the car? Let me find a car for you. I have a red car, I have a yellow car, I have a blue car, I have a fast car, I have a slow car. Which car did you want? Did you want this car? Oh, you want the slow car. So in this example, I gave the word that was in error, I gave it back multiple times with the speech sound corrected, but the flow of our conversation, our interaction, our play, it's not interrupted. This is a very natural way to correct your child's speech, and it's not overt, it's not embarrassing. It's not, trying to make your child say the speech sound, and when you do that, it could go either way. It could be successful or it could be hard. And a third rule to keep in mind for using recasting is that you want to make sure that the conditions are right. You can use recasting at any time, even if you're not sure that you have some of these conditions that I'm going to give you in a second. Even if they're not all there, you can still use it. It's not going to hurt your child. But it will be most beneficial if you can kind of check and make sure that these conditions are in place. So one is that you're gonna make sure that you actually have joint attention, meaning you and your child are engaged in interaction. You're kind of looking back and forth at each other. You're paying attention to the same thing. He's actually listening and hearing the things that you're saying right now. So that is the best time for you to use recasting. And also keeping in mind, what's the environment right now like? If it's noisy or there are a lot of distractions, or it's, you know, sometimes at the end of the day when everybody gets home, it might not be the best time to work on this because it gets chaotic. You're bringing all the bags in from the car and everybody's hungry. Not the best time to use recasting, just because your child cannot really attend to your speech and listen and process that in that moment. There's just too many things going on. So, you know, I would recommend, can you find some times where you can focus on recasting and set the environment up correctly? So maybe it's a time when things are quiet and calm, there's not as many people in the house. You can actually sit down with your child and have a one-on-one play session with them for a few minutes where you know you're both engaged, you're both attending to the same thing, he's listening to you, hearing you, you have a good interaction going. That's a great time to try to set up a situation where you can use recasting. Another rule that I like to give about recasting is that you don't ask your child to repeat it. There is a lot of benefit from just having your child hear it and for them to have time to process that and store that model in their brain. So if we ask them to repeat the model too many times, we kind of take away from that processing that's happening that allows them to store that model and remember what was said. So sometimes it's okay for us to not ask them to repeat. Another thing that I really like to mention about recasting is that while it is awesome for speech sounds, it's also a really great strategy to use for language. So if your child maybe has difficulty with vocabulary, maybe they use a word incorrectly, or they have some word finding trouble, or maybe your child has issues with using syntax and building sentences, and so they might have some grammatical type mistakes in their speech, you can use recasting to work on those things too. So recasting works for articulation or speech sounds, and it works for language. Again, it's just a great strategy to use that allows us to address mistakes in speech and language without ignoring them and without being really overt or embarrassing our child or trying to force them into saying it correctly. It's a great way to handle those mistakes that just happen naturally in their speech and language. Also, I would like to point out, recasting is great for kids that we know need help with speech sounds and language. It also works for kids that are typically developing. Typically developing kids are going to make some mistakes with speech sounds and language. It's a normal part of development. So using recasting is a really natural way to help facilitate their continued improvement in speech and in language. I really hope this video was helpful for you guys and gives you some ideas of how to handle those moments when your child says something that's incorrect in terms of their speech and language. So this video I'm also going to upload on our blog, and I will have a transcript of the video with that. And also next week, I'm going to wait a few days in case people want to sign up now. I am going to send this, or I have a PDF file that I've made, a handout that I've made about recasting. It kind of summarizes the things that I've said in the video, and it's a nice handout that you can refer back to. I'm going to send that PDF out to our email list. So if you want to go to our website, playandsay.net, at the bottom of the home page, you can sign up for our email list, and I'm going to send this PDF out. I'm going to wait a few days, maybe about a week, to give everybody a chance to sign up for our email list before I send it out. But I will do that for you guys, so you'll have it. So if you want to get it, just go sign up for our emails. So anyway, I really am super appreciative that you took the time to watch our video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps you guys. And we'll have more videos coming up later this summer. Thanks so much.